Alumni Relations at the college. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon on remote learning. This is our third webinar in our series on remote learning. Our first webinar featured our Saint Anselm College faculty. The second webinar featured our Saint Anselm College students. And today we are featuring 5 Anselmian educators who are going to share their experience and expertise as they had to transition to teaching, learning, counseling in our COVID world. I'm so grateful to our panelists who agreed to be with us this afternoon. We all know how extremely busy you are, multiple commitments, and so we're really grateful that you were able to take some time and join us this afternoon. We're having a very robust season of webinars, and we are grateful to our many partners who help us bring informative, imaginative, innovative, and exciting programming to you. We're always looking for new ideas. If you have an idea for a webinar, shoot us a line, send us an email, give us a call, and be happy to discuss those possibilities with you. Today's program is being recorded, and toward the end of the session, we'll have an opportunity for questions, and you can submit a question by using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and our moderator will do his best to get our questions in queue and to respond to all who are submitting questions. That's about it for housekeeping details. So I'd like to turn it over now to our moderator, Zach Camenker, for introductions and to start our conversation. So here's to you, Zach.
Thank you, Father Bennett. Very much appreciated. Great to be with everybody today. Thank you so much to the Alumni Office for inviting me to moderate the panel here. I'm really fortunate to be in the presence of some really great Anselmians. We had the chance to meet and chat a little bit on Monday afternoon and talk about our roles and what we've been up to. So I'm going to introduce everybody a little bit, and then I'll get us started with some of our discussion points before we get into questions later on in the program in about 20-25 minutes. So I'm Zach Camenker, member of the class of 2016. I'm a 7th grade English language arts teacher in the Bedford School District in New Hampshire. I'm president of the Manchester Area Alumni Network, and I'm joined by Dawn Mead, class of 1987, who's the principal of Pelham, New Hampshire High School. Also joined by Nikki Amara Myers, class of 93. She's a school counselor and the interim counseling director at Fontbonne Academy in Milton, Mass. Joe Parodi Brown from the class of 06, who's a Spanish teacher at Marianapolis Prep School in Thompson, Connecticut, is also joining us. And we have Colleen Reilly with us, class of 2020. She is a 2nd grade teacher at City View Elementary School in Worcester, Mass. And she is teaching entirely remotely. So she's joining us from her classroom/living room. So I'm really happy to be with all these wonderful folks today. And I think I'll just kick it off with sort of a beginning point from me and then turn it over to our panel of teachers, administrators, and counselors that we have. So we know that life has changed pretty dramatically since March, and that certainly includes life inside and outside the classroom. But in relation to schools and in relation to the classroom, a lot of what we've done and what we've trained for has changed drastically. So I am going to start with what has the transition been like in the time of COVID. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Joe to start as an experienced teacher who's been teaching for over a decade at this point. What's life been like for you, Joe, down in Connecticut?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Life has been full of big transitions and little transitions. I'm coming here from my classroom, which for the first time in 15 years, I'm teaching in a classroom other than the one that I like, my first job out of Saint Anselm. I was in that classroom every day, and I've had to move to a larger classroom because the other one just doesn't have the room to allow these socially distant desks, as you can see. And as a language teacher, sort of this transition to remote hybrid learning has been really challenging as we thrive, certainly in all disciplines, but especially in language, we thrive on these interpersonal moments. And so really trying to pick up new skills on how to engage students interpersonally when they're not right there next to you and you can't get up right next to them has been really, really challenging. I'm really grateful. I think one of the things that we'll probably end up
Looks like Joe froze. If you're still with us, Joe, one thing that helps sometimes is to turn your camera off and just speak. But if I don't hear in a moment, I may turn the floor over. So Joe, are you still with us at the moment? All right, so we heard quite a bit of good information from Joe. As a language teacher myself, I can understand the challenges with interpersonal communication, even in a student's native language. One of the things we work on quite a bit is communication, certainly. So while we wait for Joe to come back on to join us, I'm going to turn the floor to Nikki. I'd like to hear a little bit about what the counseling world has been like in COVID, as we've all been so affected by the pandemic beyond the academic sense of things.
Great, thank you. I'm so honored to be a part of this webinar. The counseling has really had to pivot a lot. And what you just saw with technology has been really something that my school, and I'm sure lots of schools, are dealing with constantly. In the spring of last year, everything felt so new and it was emergency, and we were really trying so hard to be flexible and fluid. And getting through March through June, even though it was hard, you saw an end. And coming back in September, at least our school, we're back, we're a high school, a private all girls Catholic high school. And we came back with a strong plan. Our faculty and staff, we worked all summer on our COVID relief team. And we came back to school able to implement a lot of changes. So our school is on an 8-day cycle. So every 2 days, you're either in person or at home remote. And what we're finding now, mid-November, is that we're trying to pivot again. And we're gathering feedback from all of our groups. So we've been polling students and parents, families, faculty, and staff, just to really check on how everybody's feeling and doing. In the counseling office, our hardest thing a hurdle that we're trying to overcome is we are masked with the shield and I'm sitting behind a sneeze guard. And my office is really tiny. So when students want to talk about private or confidential matters, it's really hard because they can't sit within my actual office and I can't close the door. So I've gone from really spending a lot of time with students personally to doing a lot of my more serious cases remotely. As a school counselor, personal connection is so important to me. It's how I do my job. And I'm often working with students who are either crying or sad on the other side of the screen or sitting outside my threshold. And it often, it's like a physical and emotional reaction, not being able to get close to my students. And sometimes they'll say, I just really need a hug. And it's painful not to be able to give it to them. And I'm sure I'm not alone as an educator, counselor, teacher, that we love our job because we love the human connection we have with our students. So it's been an interesting start to the fall, and my school is going to pivot again on December 2nd.
Well, thank you for that information. It's certainly quite a time for so many of us. And I talk to people all the time, and one thing they do really miss is giving hugs and receiving kind gestures and graces from students and our faculty and colleagues. Joe, it looks like you're back on with us. So I don't know if you want to wrap up what you were saying so eloquently before Zoom dropped you. This is a real struggle with the classroom. So if you want to finish what you were saying, and then I'll head over to our administrator on the panel, Dawn. But go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, thanks. Sorry about that. And I don't know how much you've heard, but I was just talking about how grateful and some of the things Nikki was saying, how grateful I am to our administration, not just for the time they invested in being really thoughtful about how we came back to campus. We are mostly back on campus. We do have some students who are online, including most of our international students. But to do that successfully, there was also a huge investment of resources in hardware and software for each of our classes, so that I can, when I've got students who are off campus, they do feel a little bit more part of this classroom environment than they would have in sort of a more typical Zoom fashion. And so I think this conversation is probably going to get into some of those questions about resources and how that has really affected the educational landscape in different ways. So thanks, Zach.
Excellent, thank you. I couldn't agree more. I think our administrators at the building level, especially, who've been so hard at work since last spring, trying to shift a whole learning platform. It's been quite amazing to watch their patience and grace, especially. And speaking of grace, I know Dawn, our principal on the panel, talked about that the other day, that grace is kind of a hallmark at her building, so as it is at mine. So Dawn, how has life changed for you as an administrator in COVID times?
You know, there's been so many changes. I really think, Nikki, I loved how you summed it up, that in the spring, there was a sense of urgency, but we saw an end. And we all, I think educators as a group are positive thinkers, and we really believed we'd be back to normal in September. And that hit hard as an administrator over the summer, working through with the task force of how do we reopen when we realized it just wasn't going to be normal. And as a district, we adopted one of our school board members, one of our biggest supporters, and you find that in a small community. I really see Pelham a lot like my days at Saint Anselm, is this small community. It's big enough that you have your space to be an individual, but that true sense of all being in it together. And we adopted what we call a culture of grace, and we remind ourselves of that every day that we're in the building. But, and I appreciate what Joe shared, because that's something we explored here at Pelham, is that whole hybrid model of kids remote and kids in front of you. And we fleshed it out quite a bit, and we opted for a family choice. So our students are either fully remote or they're in person, and they committed for the semester. So we do have, I'm the principal of two different schools, technically, a pro school, we call it our Pelham remote opportunity, and our face-to-face. So I applaud you, Joe. I don't know how you teach to the kid in front of you and the kid that's coming in on Zoom or on Google. But as an administrator, it's tough every day, because we concentrate so much on our students, and they're important. But you know, I shared this on Monday. Our young people are resilient, but our teachers, my teachers, I call them my teachers are on the front line every day, and making sure that they get what they need is what I lose sleep over every night. But I know we're going to talk about the resources and things down the road, and that really does affect how we attack this whole situation we're all in.
Absolutely. I love what you said about, you know, adopting your culture of grace and how you fleshed out so many of the plans. And I know when we talked on Monday, you know, I'm in a hybrid situation in Bedford. The size of our district sort of, we figured out, was in need of a hybrid model, because we couldn't quite figure out a way to bring everyone back safely. And one of the things that I've been really grateful for is with the kids, you know, they come in every other day, and we set them up for their home days. So I'm not Zooming in with them or having them join via Google Meet necessarily while they're at home, but I'm setting them up for sort of a more flipped classroom model where I provide them with resources to do at home, and they can reach out to me in a variety of ways. And I think the thing that strikes me about the whole situation, there's no one right or wrong way to do this. I think that's one thing we've seen in New Hampshire quite a bit, and throughout the New England states as well. But people have adopted models that work for them. And I'm really curious to hear from Colleen, as a first-year teacher, how things are working for you. I can't imagine being in your shoes, having not been a first-year teacher that long ago. It's only my 5th year in the classroom. So how are you doing, Colleen? What have you had to learn along the way? What's it been like?
So it's been super challenging. Like everyone else, I don't think there's one easy way there that we could have chosen to bring kids back into school this fall, but I am very grateful that in Worcester we started out completely remote. So by starting out completely remote, yes, it was challenging. Student teaching and all of the experiences I had at St. A's, we could have never prepared for this online teaching world. Nobody knew this was coming. So I think it's a huge learning curve for everyone, but I've heard from almost everyone, it's a great year to be a first-year teacher because everyone's kind of in it together. The unknown is so big right now, and I'm lucky that I have the technology piece. I work with 2 other teachers who are a little bit older that they'll say it, they joke all the time. They're like, Colleen, thank God for you, because if it wasn't for you, I don't know how I would get this information to these students. So they call me like fast fingers. They say you type so fast. I'm lucky I was kind of raised in this generation of technology. That being said, I think it's actually been an easier transition to be all remote than if we started in person and then carried into remote, because my students and the expectations I've set in our classroom culture has already grown so much. It's already November, and I feel like I really know my students, but it has been a super challenge. And especially I have this struggle of getting to know everyone I'm working with, getting to know the curriculum I'm teaching. I really am just fresh out of school, and now I'm trying to, turning the table and teaching students. So it's a challenge, but I think it's one of the best learning opportunities. I couldn't have been prepared any better by going to St. A's. And I think if we did know this was going to happen, definitely working on remote and all of that stuff, we would have been prepared. But in the spring, it was just so unknown.
Yeah, so much of what you've shared, very inspirational, first of all, but also, very easy to reflect on for those of us who've been teaching for a number of years now or been in the profession. I think we all probably feel like our coursework at the college, whether we were direct education students or not, prepared us quite a bit for this world of remote teaching and grace and, adapting on the fly, which is what so many teachers do best anyway. But a lot of what we've covered here, sort of best practices and lessons we've learned and such, has been some really, great material. We have questions starting to come in. I'm going to ask a couple more from our list here that we had come up with, and then shift to the questions. So if folks have any, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. But I think one of the things that I am curious about hearing from other people as a fellow educator myself is, what keeps you up at night? Because I think one of the things or what do you have a hard time sort of letting go of? One of the things that I've struggled with personally is how to sort of leave the job behind, which is a struggle in any given year. But I'd be curious to hear what people have to say about that. I'll start with Joe again, I think, from the veteran teacher perspective. What's sort of keeping you awake at night or giving you some anxiety in this new model?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I think some of the ideas that we've sort of already started talking about, and I think are reflected in some of the questions that are coming through in the chat. I'm just really mostly concerned about the well-being of my colleagues and of my students and my loved ones, of course. And so that's really it for me. I'm really lucky to be involved in some really great professional networking groups through Twitter and other social media. The language teacher community is really active in a lot of those things. And one of the things that we're all talking about is that this isn't the year to make sure you get to every lesson you've always gotten to. This isn't the year to worry that your kids are falling behind because, well, first of all, behind what? Because this is literally a global pandemic, right? Whom are they falling behind is the question. And so, so like that being, and I had a conversation with my associate head of school today, because one of the things we're just about to finish trimester 1. We actually shifted to trimesters this year, knowing that would give us more flexibility if we had to do remote or that sort of thing. And we're making some changes to the schedule for the second trimester. And for example, adding some days off to the calendar because of other shifts, and they're going to fall on Mondays and Fridays. And the way our calendar works right now, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays are one set of classes, and Tuesdays, Thursdays are another set of classes. So there's this big question about, well, if we're only missing Mondays and Fridays, what about the Tuesdays? Shouldn't we give back some of those days and take away from the Tuesdays, Thursdays? But then there's a time question, like how many minutes per week? And I said, but at some point we just need to say, like, just let go of it all. If every class doesn't meet the same amount of times or the same amount of numbers or minutes, we're all going to be okay about this. We really, really are. So that's sort of, how I've prevented myself from being kept up every night.
Well, good for you, because it's challenging in any year to let those things go. But so much of what you've said, I think we can all identify with, and it definitely resonates. I'd be curious, Nikki, you probably have situations in a regular year where, you're kept up thinking of a kid, or it's hard to sort of let some of the issues with your students go. So how's that working for you, and how are you incorporating some of the mental health practices with your students and colleagues that you shared with us on Monday?
Yeah, thank you, Zach. Lots of things keep me up at night. Before the pandemic, they were there, but now I'm often worried about students' mental health, their well-being, their, there's a hit to their confidence. I also worry about my colleagues, and I worry about the fact that many people are asking for, when is this going to end, or what are we going to do? And maybe people are looking for concrete answers. And that keeps me up at night trying to figure out, how do I support and stay calm in a time of chaos? And that is really, really challenging for me. And it constantly makes me think about my clinical practices and how I work with students and collaborate with parents and my colleagues. At Fontbonne, I've offered, it's called Meditation with Myers, and it's during one of our activities block. And I've been doing it, once a week, once a cycle. And we come together and we meditate, and I lead the group in meditation. And what I find is it's so wonderful to see the students relax, and the adults, and to see them fall asleep. And I think some of my students will say that they're up at night wondering and having difficulty. And they'll often say to me, is it okay if I fall asleep? And I endorse that fully, because it's nice to see them take a deep breath. And but it's really hard. Just in, since school started, we've had a dramatic increase in mental health concerns. And we often talk here about just Zoom fatigue and fatigue in general, and how many faculty and staff feel like they're working much, much harder having to switch from synchronous to asynchronous to who's in my classroom, who's not in my classroom, should this person be in my classroom? And also thinking about, what happens when someone doesn't show up virtually? And what if someone shows up and doesn't put their camera on? Or what if someone shows up and they don't want their educator, their teacher, to see what home is like? It's a lot of very complicated and complex issues that I feel all of us are dealing with. And from a counseling perspective, we see it all the time.
Well, kudos to counselors, because, where would we be without them in schools and in life? And I, as I said on Monday when we chatted, I love the meditation piece. It's something that I have found to be a really good practice for myself. And one thing I would recommend to any teachers who are watching now or who watch the recording, Headspace is now free to teachers, which is wonderful. And then Calm, which is not the app that I use, but I know a lot of people do, believe has a free edition for teachers as well. So I think it's great that we're supporting our teachers, our counselors, and our admin are doing the best that they can to do so. So Dawn, as a principal, what keeps you sort of up at night, or what keeps you really deep in thought about your faculty and staff and students in this current model that we're in?
Yeah, well, up at night, I think I'm averaging honestly about 2-3 hours of fitful sleep. And anyone that goes into administration, safety is always first, right? That's what we've thought about, that's what we've trained for. But safety in the time of a global pandemic, takes it to a whole new level. And I worry about one of my kids getting sick, and I worry about one of my teachers getting sick. And you watch, I know you're not supposed to have your phone near the bed, but I do when I watch it light up and I'm like, somebody called in. Am I tracing a close contact? What do we need to do? And I worry about building a culture and keeping a positive climate when, Nikki said it best, there's that disconnect. You don't realize the physical connection and how much you miss that, just the high fives in the hallway, the knuckle bumps. I'll brag for a moment, but my football team won the Division III state championship this past weekend, and to watch those boys and not be able to high five them or shake their hand, everyone's behind a mask. And keeping that energy, I believe that the principal's personality is seen throughout their building. So making sure that I come in every day and bring that positive energy, but the fatigue is there. You walk into a classroom and you feel the energy is different. Kids are in rows, they're facing the same way, they have masks on. And even my most dynamic teachers, the place I go to have that moment of, yeah, this is why we do it. The energy, it's just a different field. We're doing amazing things. Learning still going on in a very different way. I lose sleep trying to explain to my teachers that I don't expect bell to bell anymore. We've got to give ourselves a break. And I think I shared on Monday, the hardest thing to say as a principal is, I don't know. And wow, do I say that a lot. I say, I don't know a lot. And to take day by day when you're a type A planner is really, that's a personal struggle. But every day these kids come through the door, every day everyone's safe, for me is a win. So I've learned the day-to-day approach.
Amazing. I think, the thing I say to people a lot is our leadership, our principals, they really are always on call and always, thinking about school as we are in ways. But kudos to our administrators out there for keeping up with things. And it's a job where, it never leaves at the door when you leave the building. So I appreciate hearing so much of what you said about your staff, how hard they've worked. And I think a lot of amazing things are going on in all our schools and throughout the states and country because hard work is going into it. And I'm inspired just hearing stories from folks. And I'd be curious, Colleen, because I remember my first year teaching, and the things that kept me up at night, or the things that kept me in my room for 11 or 12-hour days, which still happens sometimes, but certainly not in the way that they did that first year, planning through new curriculum and such. What is it that's challenging for you, or what is it that you have a hard time letting go of?
I will say I am often working for about 11 or 12 hours a day. But I've been really good about, limiting that to Monday through Thursday night, and Friday, is a planning day for us, luckily. So we only have to plan for Monday through Thursday, but I am planning a full day, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. every single day on the computer. So it's like I'm reenacting a full day of school on the computer every day. That has been a huge challenge, but it's hard to walk away from the work at the end of the day, because you have so much to do and you just want to be better for the next day. I think that's something, that's a trait every teacher pretty much carries with them, is they want to be their best and they want to give their best to their students. So that's definitely the hardest thing, is especially because like I'm in a guest bedroom in my house right now. So I can't leave work and say I'm leaving work. Like I walk by this room to go to sleep every night. It's the door's open and I find myself wandering in here and doing my work. I think it's really hard to disconnect, because I am on the computer all day, every day. I'm looking into the homes of my students. I'm seeing and hearing things that you wouldn't believe. And it's definitely a stress that, school is a really safe place for students. And right now there is no physical safe place for them to go. Between the hours of 9 and 3, if I have them in front of me and I'm looking at them, that's great. But, it hurts to know that I don't know what's going on after that. But I think the planning struggle is a huge one. I think just like, Nikki, you were saying the mental health struggle is another huge one. But Joe, I love what you said about how, some of these things you just have to let go. And that's another thing that I've been dealing with is, thinking about these students and making sure that I'm giving them the right assessment, giving them everything they need to succeed, trying to scaffold that information for them, and knowing sometimes it's just not going to happen, and that's okay. I just have to say, I tried my best and that's okay. I think that would be the biggest struggle.
Yeah, and it's not like, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna jump in. It's not like their second grade teacher is gonna be like, oh, what happened to these kids, right? Because they lived through it too, right? And that's where it comes from.
Right, exactly. And it's like, I do think about that all the time. Like I think about, oh my gosh, when these kids go on to third grade next year, they're gonna be like, what did you do last year? And we all just are in the same boat. We know we tried our best.
It's survival. It really, truly is. And I'm so glad to hear you say, I don't always know what's next, or I have to just sort of throw the hat in, and that's okay, because the colleague that I share a door with came up with, that expression toward the beginning of the year, when we were both sort of stumbling through some of the roadblocks at the beginning. And she said to me, we might not be able to get to that, and that's okay. So we've adopted that model in our team and as a working relationship, and it's been wonderful. So I really am glad to hear, so many people going through the same things, no matter where they're working, no matter what zip code you're in. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions we have that have come in. We've got some really great ones, and certainly feel free to send others in, folks. But I think the first one that struck me, and I'll start the response to this and then turn it over to anybody who's interested. But someone remarks that during the faculty panel in this series, a professor mentioned that there seems to be no way going back to how it was before. Technology use is here to stay. An example was given, doing a thesis review via Zoom instead of emails back and forth. So the question is, are there things you think will stay even when the pandemic is over? And one thing I will say, I think a lot of us who work in the public school setting have really adapted with technology in the past, decade plus. I know in talking with all of you on Monday, like Dawn remarked, you're one-to-one with Chromebooks and such, as is my school in Bedford. So I think it depends on the setting for that one. How will that look depending on schools? I know people who work in schools that don't have a lot of technology, but I think there are some good things that have come out of this. Like, I did parent conferences via Google Meet last week, which is such a huge perk for people who work full days. I had parents Zooming in from their offices. I had parents who had just gotten home, or they were in between, picking their son up from somewhere and taking their daughter somewhere else, and they don't have time to go to the school, whereas they have time to do it in another realm. So I actually think that there's some good to the technology piece, but I do see, and feel free to chime in, folks, with this idea of Zoom fatigue and technology fatigue being a very real thing. I do think it's a perk to have more now, but I worry myself. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in with things that they worry about with that.
Yeah, I'd like to jump, not necessarily with this idea of like worrying, and maybe not even this idea of technology, but one idea related to technology and whatnot. I've got a friend who teaches in Georgia, and one of the things she and I have been talking about is that, yeah, distance learning and remote learning has been harder for most of our students, but for some of our students, they've thrived in this remote learning environment. And so she's, starting to talk with her district about, being a remote Spanish teacher in the future, and just a remote Spanish teacher, right? So she doesn't have the back and forth, which is what's, really exhausting everyone. But, that may be a better way of learning for some students. And so I think that ability to differentiate in that way is really important. The thing that I think may affect our practice going forward that isn't technology related is that as teachers, we're able to see some activities that worked great in our classrooms and that don't work well. And we might find that one of the reasons they work so well is that it wasn't about students learning and being intrinsically motivated. It was about student compliance, and they were compliant when they were here, but they're not as compliant at home. So maybe it wasn't that great an activity in the first place. Sure. And so there's going to be able to be a lot of reflection on a lot of what we do in the day-to-day that'll make us better going forward.
Thank you, Joe.
Zach, I'd love to respond to this a little bit.
Absolutely.
At Fontbonne, we have 35 different communities that send their children here. And what I have found is that we use Google Meet. So we, all of us are using it. And I find it so wonderful that it's provided access to people who maybe don't want to drive another hour to Fontbonne, but who are engaged and loving and want to support their children. So I have found it really positive and a useful tool. Before the pandemic, I would have never thought to use a Google Meet. And I pride myself on, I love technology, I'm not afraid of it. However, now that I do it, I feel like my confidence has grown, and it really has provided access that I didn't have before. So that's really exciting. And as far as the pandemic, last year in the spring, our faculty and staff were using different modes of giving assignments and accepting them. And now our whole school is using Google Classroom, including all the counselors. So we have one platform that we're using. We had maybe a couple days in August where the people at school who were using it and felt it was successful, they trained us all. And I remember the first time I used it and I thought, where have you been all my life? Except you were right there, I just didn't know. So now that I use it, I feel so empowered, and I have a school counseling Google Classroom, and I have I'm one of the moderators for the Tulip team. So I have a Tulip team classroom, and it's just made communication so much easier. And it takes 5 seconds for me to put a document up that I want students to look at or respond to. So that for me has been incredibly positive. And Fontbonne administration, all the way down to everyone, they've really supported this training, and they've allowed us to say, wow, this is amazing, show me more. So we're sharing a lot of resources, and with every resource that a teacher or faculty shares, it's just another tool that we can use to help students access the curriculum and help us communicate better, which is always a goal of mine.
And what better way to do it than to share with your colleagues? I think that's such a good practice for any of us in any given year. So that, I think, transitions us well to this question about digital tools. So we've touched on Google Meet. I know I use Google Meet and Google Classroom as well. I know Dawn had said that on Monday, they're using much of that in Pelham as well. So digital tools, I think, to enhance instruction, it varies school to school, certainly, but I think Nikki did a nice job of sort of starting off that question. I'll say, I certainly through remote in the spring and even prior to that was doing a lot with Google and trying my best to implement our technology practice that we had. But this has made me, I think, more aware of the things that I can do and the things that are beneficial to put out through technology platforms like Classroom and like some of the other platforms that support it, that kids will just respond better to than paper and pencil, or when they can't do group work, certainly technology leverages that platform. I don't know if anybody else has other tech tools they're using that they'd be interested in sharing that have helped with instruction online or hybrid. Colleen, I'd actually be interested to hear what your situation's like, given that you're remote and you have students from Worcester.
Yeah, so I'm really lucky because Worcester gave each student a Chromebook and a hotspot, and every single student has access to this technology, which was amazing. So the technology we use, it is Google. It's Google, Meets, Google Classroom. Every day my lesson is right on a Google slide, and I share my screen. I click through it. I embed tons of timers throughout my day. YouTube timers, 15-minute break here, 20 minutes to do independent work, because I literally, they're second grade. I have to pretty much take their hand and guide them through our day. I can't just send them off and say, okay, do your work, be back at 1:30. Some of them don't even know how to read the clock yet. So, that's been really hard. Something I've noticed is parent communication has been really huge, because it's a digital platform, and this is, a lot different. So, not just getting students to do their work, but to receive the work that they've done so that I know what they're learning. I've been doing that through Google Classroom, obviously, but Class Dojo is an app that I've been using. And it's also an incentive-based app. So you can give the class points, you can give individual students points. I think that's really been driving instruction. Just, to keep the classroom culture of noticing when a student is typing in the chat box, complimenting another student, or, if a student is helpful throughout the day, keeping those school norms, because, the kindergarten class this year, you have to remember, will never have been in a school. So I think, especially at the elementary level, just kind of keeping things as normal as possible. But again, using that technology to our advantage is a huge thing that I've been focusing on. Absolutely.
I don't know if anyone else has any technology platform to share. Otherwise, I'll move on to another question here. I think is very important. As a parent, what should we be doing at home to better support our teachers? That is, a very layered question. It's one that every school has talked about. Colleen talking about parent communication being paramount struck a chord with me too, because one of the things that we instituted on my pod, so at the middle school level, we work on pods or teams of 4 teachers, usually one for each subject area for the students. And one of my pod mates in the spring suggested, why don't we try a newsletter, a weekly remote learning newsletter, to put forth some of the things that we're doing, especially because we did a lot asynchronously at the time. So certainly good communication strategies are strong things to be thinking about. We're still doing the newsletter now, even in the hybrid model. But I think, if parents ask that, what can we be doing to support our teachers? A lot of what has been done, I think, has been supportive of us. Certainly, being communicative is very important. starting with the teacher when you have a concern is always important to me. I know just being supportive at home of the kids and recognizing that, it's not a normal year and they might not have the same amount of work necessarily that they've had. Things have changed. So I think just being adaptable and graceful and accepting of, our ups and downs through this is important. But that's a really great question. I don't know if anybody specifically wants to answer that. I know as an administrator, Dawn, that might be something that you've talked about with your teachers. What can parents do to help support teachers and staff?
Well, and it's interesting because I'm not sure who mentioned it, but Zach, it actually might have been you, is I have a parent voice group that meets. I have one evening and one morning session every month with really low attendance. But now that we've gone on that virtual platform and they can pop into a Google Meet, as an administrator, when you turn on, you're like, oh, what am I doing wrong? Because you have I had 100 parents show, but it's because they were at home or they were in their car. And you're like, wow. But on the high school level, I think the best thing parents can do is give themselves a break. I asked my students last week, I do a real talk Friday with them. And it was to give your parents, show your parents the same grace and kindness that you show your friends and others. Because I can't imagine being a parent at home trying to work with two little ones in two different remote classrooms, going into a Zoom, popping out with your high school student that we all know and remember. If you can sleep in, you're gonna sleep in. So I think the best thing parents can do is give themselves a break. But we offered something at Pelham. I didn't. I admit to not being a tech person. I'm in my 50s, and this is all. I'm that parent that does this. What are we doing now? But we offered a Google training workshop for our parents, so they knew how to maneuver the classroom. They knew what to look for in the stream. And it was great to see the turnout for that. Parents really appreciated getting to know the technology.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Zach,
Go
I'd like
ahead.
to make just a quick comment about this. I love this question. And from the high school side, from the counselor, is if parents notice something about their child that just doesn't seem right, or it seems different, sleep habits, eat habits, mood, I encourage parents to reach out to the school counselor or your child's favorite teacher or the assistant head of school. At Fontbonne, the school counselors, we work very closely with our assistant head of school and our principal. And our partnership really includes our partnership with our students as well as our partnership with our families. And what I find is there were really rich conversations between the school counselors and parents who basically say, I can't give you anything specific, but something just doesn't feel right. And we collaborate, and a lot of times we really, our partnership either established a connection with a therapist outside of school, or it gets the family coming together with the school counselor virtually. And I just find that so important. I find that partnership is it's invaluable, especially now, because I want to know if my student doesn't come out of her bedroom all day. I want to know if my student hasn't eaten or hasn't checked in with a teacher. And even our teachers at Fontbonne, they're wonderful because they'll say, so-and-so wasn't in class today. Do you know what's going on? And that just kicks off, I use the word investigation, but it really is kind of this clinical wraparound to say, let's figure out what's going on and let's figure out how we can put some resources in place, provide some assistance, and hopefully allow the student to do her job, which is to be happy, learn, be engaged, make connections. So the partnership is really important. And although all of us are exceptionally busy and we're all pivoting every second, we're never too busy for parent communication and connection.
At all levels, I completely agree. You know, we have people from elementary, middle, and high school here, and no matter the age of your child, I think it's important to know that we're here for them, and you know, we want to keep updated on how they're doing and keep tabs on their progress. And it's a global pandemic, as Joe said, so we don't expect, you know, that kids are in their normal state these days with everything. So it's certainly okay to reach out for help. I've said that to parents before, you know, thank you so much for letting me know and reaching out and feeling comfortable and confident that we could create some type of partnership here. We're toward the last 10 minutes of our program. So some of the questions that have come in have been addressed in ways already. You know, when you're working with a student that's having a difficult time, how do you show that empathy with the hugs and handshakes and such? I think Nikki and Dawn both touched on that, certainly. Dawn with her, you know, challenge that she had with the winning football team, and Nikki talking about some of the kids that she counsels. And I know for me, the thing that works sometimes is the elbow bump, you know, if that's something that you've been able to cultivate with kids. But just even through a mask, just the affirming voice, I think that it's going to be okay. You've got this. We all do that in some way, shape, or form, I'm sure. I think that the question that I would like to sort of look at here to end our hour, because we've also sort of addressed some of the technology issues that people have at the home, you know, if they're having difficulties at home. Colleen touched on that really well. How are schools cultivating community? That is such a wonderful question to ask at a time like this. And I know it's hard, and, you know, certainly I've seen that with my own colleagues and staff, but how are schools cultivating community? Joe, I'd be interested to hear, you've worked at your school a long time. How's the community piece going?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important an important question, an important point. You know, Don was talking about being in a small community and how it feels a lot like Saint Anselm. The second I pulled off campus, when I interviewed down here at Marianapolis, I called my mother and I said, it feels so much like St. A's. I think I'm going to go work there. And so community is a really huge, important part of who we are. You know, at a lot of schools and at a lot of independent schools, like the one I'm at, right, traditions are really important. And so maintaining traditions in the ways that we can and adapting traditions. So, you know, we have a full school meeting it was Monday morning meeting. And so we now do that through our WebEx. We're not a Zoom or Google Meet, we use WebEx, but so it still happens. And no one claps as much as a Marianapolis student. Some people have taken to calling it Marian Clapalis, because we will clap for every announcement and morning meeting at every moment. And so in our gatherings now, there's only a small group of people in the chapel, but you can hear them loudly clapping every announcement as a way of carrying that on. Another quirky tradition we have is Rake Day, the first Friday of every November. We don't have classes. We literally go out by advisory and rake the school. And so I was really skeptical about how it was going to work this year, because we couldn't share rakes and we're all supposed to be far apart and all that. It may have been one of the best rake days we've had in the 14 years I've been at school. Now, the fact that it was 70 degrees on the first Friday in November didn't hurt, but there was just such great camaraderie. And so things are different, but we are adopting traditions and maintaining them in the way we can. And that's been really, really important for us.
Fantastic. Colleen, how's it working for you since you're in your first year, you're new to the school? Are they trying to cultivate community among the kids and among the staff?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, so every Friday we have a planning day. The whole day has been put aside for teachers to plan and prepare for the following week, and students do asynchronous work all day. So that has helped a lot, because often we have, whole staff meets. So I'm getting to know these people. I've really never met them in person, but it's nice because, you can hang around and just chat and get to know people. And talk about what's working in their classroom, what's not working in their classroom. But for the students, I think cultivating community for the whole school has had a lot to do with what we are using for asynchronous practice. So we use ST Math to practice math, which is a platform. It's a standards-driven game. So students have all these levels based on their grade level. And the whole school has been doing that, during our downtime. So time that, they don't have to listen to my voice. And I give them about 20 minutes a math period. And I think the fact that they know the whole school does that helps, because it still makes them feel really connected. And, if they have siblings in the school, they're talking about ST Math and they're talking about, so finding commonalities, even though it's remote and everything's super different, I think helps. But in terms of my own classroom, I've been working so hard to cultivate community, because we're in second grade, we're still doing the fun cutesy stuff, as my friends would put it. I have my class bucket, I have stars on the wall, and if they do something well, I just put a star on the wall, because they just like that excitement and knowing that they worked towards something. I do Go Noodle all the time, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's movement and dancing. It's an online website. It's amazing. And I think just little things like that, fun things to really help the day go by.
That's awesome. It's so inspiring to hear so many of those really great points coming from your building together. I got a couple things here for me specifically on the screen, and one thing goes for everybody. I'm glad I wasn't
the only one who was distracted by Harrison in the corner there.
So I got a question, because I have my book there, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. So there's Indiana Jones. What's my favorite Indiana Jones movie? I'd have to say the first one, Raiders of the Lost Ark, although I have a soft spot for Sean Connery showing up as the father in the third one. We don't talk about the Temple of Doom. We just don't. And another person has said thank you for the great job that you're doing at Lurgio. That's the school that I work at. I think we can extend that to everybody here. Thanking everybody for the job they're doing in Bedford and Pelham, at Fontbonne in Milton, down in Connecticut at Marianapolis, and in Worcester at City View as well. I know we're toward the top of the hour, so I hate to cut such a wonderful conversation short, but I do know that we have our own busy lives as well, as do our attendees. But I can turn it back over to Father Bennett at this point, I think, for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you to all of our panelists. This was a very inspiring conversation this afternoon. I am very much in awe of what you do day in and day out. I learned a lot, and it was just to see the enthusiasm and the bonding. I thought it was kind of cool, the bonding that you five shared. You only met remotely for 2 days, but I feel that there was a good energy and it was because you all are passionate about what you're doing as teachers. And that just came through so loud and clear and wonderfully. So I just want to end by thanking you for what you do, and thanking you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. Really a great conversation, and I am very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us, and thank you to the panel for doing such a wonderful job. It was great to have your contributions.
And on that, we'll say good night. I know Dawn has to go to a school board meeting now, I think.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.